Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, in the fall of 1945, former Prime Minister Winston Spencer Churchill received an otherwise nondescript letter from a college in the middle of Missouri that I suspect he had not heard of. It was from Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, a letter signed by the President, F.L. McClure, and it invited the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to come and deliver a lecture in the winter of 1945 or 1946, or in the spring of 1946, the letter says. We should be glad to arrange the date or dates to suit your convenience, the President of Westminster College told this most famous of former prime ministers. I wonder, Mr. President, what might have happened had there not been a postscript attached to this same letter, handwritten at the bottom and the left corner as it came to Mr. Churchill, in a different hand from that signed by the President. The postscript reads, "This is a wonderful school in my home state. Hope you can do it. I will introduce you." And that is signed Harry S. Truman. Well, as it turns out, Winston Churchill accepted this invitation from F.L. McClure and from President Harry S. Truman, and in March of 1946, Prime Minister Churchill boarded President Truman's presidential train and traveled with him overland to Fulton, Missouri, a visit that took him to Westminster College, and a visit that took Westminster College into the history books, because it was there in March of 1946 that Winston Churchill delivered his famous speech in which he said, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent." Churchill called the speech the Sinews of Peace speech, but as everyone listening to these words knows, it has become immortalized forever as the Iron Curtain speech. It was a perilous moment in Europe, the onset of the Cold War, at a time when Europe and much of the West was exhausted and really wished that perhaps there was a way to just make peace with the Soviet Union, to look the other way, to say it's time to recover after years of warfare. We couldn't risk another confrontation. The stakes are too high, the people too exhausted. And Churchill reminded the West of the civilizational principles on which we are founded and which the United States and the United Kingdom share together. The principles of conscience and what he called Christian civilization, the principles of faith and liberty that undergirded our alliance in the Second World War, that have been the principles on which this nation was founded from the beginning, and that continue to animate us today. And Churchill spoke with great boldness and moral clarity for those principles on that day in March of 1946, and a speech that deserves the fame that has been attached to it ever since. Now, the interesting thing, Mr. President, is that when he came there to Fulton, such a crowd gathered to hear Prime Minister Churchill that they couldn't find enough space in the town of Fulton. It's not a very big town. In fact, the only space they had in the town or on the campus big enough was a gymnasium, the Westminster College Gymnasium, which is where Churchill delivered his famous address with President Harry S. Truman there, introducing him just as he had promised. Well, in the years that followed, the good folks at Westminster College decided perhaps a more fitting memorial would be in order. And so, Mr. President, they found the remains of a church in the United Kingdom, right near London, St. Mary Aldermanbury, which had first been built in 1181 as a Christian parish church used in continuous service from the 12th century. It was destroyed by the Great Fire of London in 1666, after which it was rebuilt and redesigned by the great Sir Christopher Wren, only for it to be demolished again by the Blitz in 1940. And as it existed at this time in 1946, it was basically just a pile of rubble, bricks destroyed by the Nazi onslaught. The people of Westminster took that church and those bricks and brought them to the site of Churchill's famous speech and rebuilt it. You can see a picture of it here with a statue of Churchill giving his famous address. St. Mary Aldermanbury is reimagined by Sir Christopher Wren, a church that existed for 1,000 years, standing for the rights of liberty and conscience, standing for the deepest principles of mankind that this nation has always itself stood for, brought from the UK to the heart of the United States in central Missouri and rebuilt there. I can't help but think, Mr. President, of the symbolism that these civilizational values, these sinews of our Christian civilization, defended for so long in the United Kingdom, but finding their true home in the United States of America, just as that church was rebuilt in the heart of Missouri, so in the heart of this country still the defense of the West lives on. Moral courage and moral clarity burns on. And as Churchill gave voice to those principles in that day, this building now stands in Fulton, Missouri as a testament to what we believe in, to what we stand for, and to the moral purpose that continues to animate us in 2025. Since that time, that building and that location has been turned into a National Churchill Museum by the folks at Westminster. And today, Mr. President, we have just passed legislation that will finally recognize this most significant site commemorating a most significant event as a national historic landmark that the National Park Service will administer and maintain so that generations of Americans and people of goodwill everywhere can come to that site and learn about Churchill's speech, and perhaps more fundamentally, learn about the principles of liberty and conscience and faith and moral virtue on which this nation, and indeed the whole of the West, were founded. This is an appropriate moment, I think, as we close this year to honor the legacy of Winston Churchill, the legacy of Westminster College, and indeed the legacy of the West. May we do our part always to defend it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.